Welcome to my tier list for water decks. I'll be evaluating these decks based off of their overall performance, their consistency, and how well these decks do in the current meta. Also note, any deck can reach Master Rank. The higher the rank a deck is listed, the easier it will be to reach Master Rank. So for the first archetype we're going to tackle here is Aqua Actress. This deck has seen better days. With Swap Frog limited and Toad banned, this deck is even more unplayable than it already was. Next up is Water Dragons. This deck is terribly inconsistent, it relies on things like 3-card combos, and its win condition has been completely power crept. This deck is going to need a lot of support if it's ever going to be relevant again. Next up we have Cloudians. This deck has a powerful win condition, being able to summon up to 7 or more interruptions, but by every metric you can measure a deck, this deck is terrible. So it has no consistency, and its combo can be stopped with just one hand trap. Next up is Christians. This is one of my favorite water decks, but it's only playable in Duel Links. Christian suffers from a terrible problem. A very important card, Christian Hulky Fibrax, was banned. Without it, the deck is completely inconsistent. Even with Hulky Fibrax, the deck was power crept a long time ago. Next up is Legendary Fisherman. This deck is really Yuumi control with Fisherman characteristics. Its win condition is a tower that's unaffected by everything except tributes and monster effects. The downside is that monster effects that remove cards are quite common nowadays, and it also hurts that skill drain was limited, so it cannot easily defend itself against monster effects. Even though the deck is more consistent than it's ever been before, it's still not up to par by today's standard, because it still requires a 3-card combo. You need Fisherman on the field, you need a way to get Fisherman on the field, and then you need Legendary Fisherman 3 in your hand. Next up is Gradle. Gradle is commonly played with Kaijus. It has a strong rogue presence and mini events as a going second strategy. It doesn't do so well outside of these events because unlike other going second strategies, Gradle requires going into the battle phase to do anything. So you're not going to have a good time if your opponent has no monsters or they are in defense position and you have no Kaijus. Penguins. This deck is a bronze deck. It has many casual combos that rely on mixing it with other archetypes, but in my opinion, it just ends up slowing down those other archetypes by making them more inconsistent. Next is Ice Barrier. This deck just recently got support in OCG, and in the current state of MasterDuel, Ice Barrier is a casual deck that, like Penguins, can be used as an engine in other more powerful water decks. You can mix it with Marincess, Goatee, and Ice Shades. If you took out Ice Barrier from these other water decks, you probably wouldn't notice, because it doesn't really add that much value. In the final bronze deck, Ursarctic. This deck has a win condition that only shuts down Link and XZ monster effects, and has pretty terrible card advantage if you don't draw the Ursarctic Radiation spell. Fortunately, this deck is getting future support, so it will gain the ability to shut down all extra deck monsters, and it will also be able to search the Radiation spell. Necros is going into the gold rank. Once a tier 0 deck, it has fallen from grace after the Jhin releaser of Rituals was banned. It's now just a strong casual deck that can be mixed with Drytron and Dogmatica, and has a strong win condition that can also lock enemies from using all extra deck monster effects. Paleozoics is another gold rank. This deck has seen almost no play after Toad was banned, and adding insult to injury, Swap Frog became limited. There are still diehard fans who play this deck with tier elements or sprites, and any deck that has synergy with tier element is going to at least be a strong casual deck. Next is Phantasm. This deck just ignores common hand traps like Maxi or Imperm, so it's always been a strong rogue deck. But with bans to many of its floodgates and limits to terraforming to search its very important field spell, this deck has fallen to being just a strong casual deck. Shark is another deck that has been shipwrecked by the ban list. Without Totally Awesome, it has a very weak recovery and a weaker turn 1 board. Goes in Match was also limited, so it can no longer rely on its Kragan control win condition. Despite all of this, it's consistent at getting an XZ on the field, and can carry plenty of hand traps, so it maintains itself as a formidable casual deck. Next is Dynamist. This deck got recent support with Dynamite Power Lord the Draco Slayer. But even with the support, it has no master rank wins, the deck is crippled by interruptions, and it's overshadowed by more powerful pendulum decks that can make better use of Draco Slayer. It's a strong casual deck that can pull off multiple negates going first, and it can OTK by attacking directly when going second. We're going to place Ice Shades and Platinum. Ice Shades has a powerful win condition that shuts down the opponent's monster effects and so many cards that makes your boards almost impossible to break. The only thing holding it back is that it has a terrible consistency. This will be resolved with the release of future support of Ice Shade Ron. The Big Fish Coelacanth is a much stronger deck with the release of Goatee, with many ways to play through Ash Blossom nowadays if you're a savvy deck builder. If you cannot pull off your Coelacanth combo, you can still extend into Aryan Post to pull off a Deep Beyond combo. Its win conditions are basically an FTK, and the only thing holding it back is Max C and its inability to break strong boards going second. Goatee is a more consistent deck without Coelacanth. I'm going to go ahead and place it here in the Diamond rank. Goatee can also carry hand traps, so it's stronger when going second, making it a more competitive variant. Goatee is one of the only decks that can take the Max C challenge twice and still win. Just banish all cards on the field twice and your opponent will run out of extenders to follow up, and then you can easily OTK the following turn. And Goatee just received White Aura support in OCG. These White Aura cards act as extenders, increasing the power ceiling of Goatee, giving you better turn 1 end boards. But I think if Goatee is going to be a more competitive deck, it's going to need a better starter or more ways to banish fish from your deck. Mermail Atlantean has been a strong water deck for a very long time. You can mix this deck with Sprite Link monsters and it becomes very consistent and versatile. It would be higher on this list if it weren't for the Toad Band and limits to both Sprites and Nimble Beaver. And the release of Ice Shade Ron opens up new possibilities for what Atlanteans can do. This is because Ice Shade Ron can discard Dragoons to trigger a search. In fact, Ice Shade Ron will just make most water decks better, so I cannot wait for this card to be released. Next up is Yuumi Control. This is a deck that has survived all of the consistency hits. Foolish Goods, Pot of Prosperity, Extravagance, and Floodgate hits all hurt the deck pretty bad, dropping it out of Master Rank and into Diamond. Despite this, Yuumi Control still has plenty of players who can still reach Master Rank because of how strong its win condition is, and because it's one of the few decks that really doesn't care about the most common card in the game, Max C. As pointed out by another Yu-Gi-Tuber, the name Yuumi Control is propaganda, because this deck is really Yuumi Stun, but let's just keep that a secret. The first of our top water decks is Marincess. This deck reaches Master 1 every season. It's a very consistent one-card combo deck with space of up to 20 hand traps and board breakers. It can easily link climb into an unaffected boss monster with a high attack stat that many decks just don't have an out to. One of the only things holding this deck back is that it cannot always easily OTK the following turn. But despite that, this is one of the most powerful water decks that have ever existed. It is one of the most consistent water decks and has one of the most powerful win conditions. Plunder Patrol is another top water deck. It's one of the most versatile water decks with an extra deck toolbox that has an answer to almost any situation. This deck also main decks Kaiju, so it has a strong going second. This deck's gameplay changes depending on what attribute your opponent is playing, so this also makes the deck very interactive. Rika is the most powerful water deck at the moment. It's a one-card combo water deck that merged with Earth Plants, and the result is a more powerful meta deck. Its main gimmick is that it tributes the opponent's monsters as a cost to activate their own effects, so it can deal with any nuisance. It's also a very flexible deck with access to an array of different plant techs like Cactus Bouncer and Rose Whip, so it can swap out cards depending on the meta to maintain meta relevancy. This deck also manages to dodge every ban list, so it will be here for a while. And another strength of this deck is that it does so much that your opponent really has no idea how this deck works. The last archetype on this list is Gishki. For the past few years, this deck has been pretty bad. It has no consistency and loses to one Ash Blossom. The new support gives it the push to bring it to meta relevancy. It has access to a new powerful removal, which lets it tribute the opponent's cards as a cost for a ritual summon. And TCG, Gishki was released at the wrong time. It came out a week before Sprite Elf was banned, and also during a meta where both Tearlaments and Kashtira were at full power. In MasterDuel, Gishki is being released with Tyr and Kashtira at much weaker levels, and Sprite Elf is still legal, So I think this deck is going to do much better. It's at least diamond rank, but it has the potential to be a master rank water deck. But for now, we're going to place Gishki in the rookie zone. Its new support should be out in a few days, so we're just going to wait until the Gishki support is released, give it some time to swim before we move it up the water deck leaderboard. So what do you all think? Did I miss any water decks? Do you agree with my rankings? Do you think any decks deserve to be higher? Drop a comment below, like, and subscribe. You can find a copy of this TierMaker in the description if you'd like to make your own. And that's all for now.